Well, here we are. I can't believe there are so many people here. Must be the festive season, I reckon.
Might be guilt.
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 What's what? Don't like the beer?
Well, I was tempted not to come, but I feel guilty.
Because you thought you'd be the only person here.
Well, that's just the way it is.
Yeah.
No,
Right.
but sometimes you have to make the effort.
Well, you do have to make the effort, and that's the interesting thing is. Now I've done 10 this year. I don't even know whether I want to do any more next year because they've been an interesting intellectual exercise, but I'm not sure if they're of any interest to a wider audience. And I think the trouble in Australia, as we all know, is that we think history started this morning. You know, we have no memory as a people, and that's part of the colonisation process where the past has been, sent to a dim, distant past which we don't look at. And it's not just colonisation; it's even about everything that we take for granted in society today. Things like universal health care, a social security system, the right to strike, which has been removed, and the list goes on and on. Because we live in a society where the future starts every morning. It's like a groundhog day, and we go through the same thing over and over and over again. So what have I learnt doing research into 19th century radical Australian history? I learnt a lot of things, and I thought I knew a lot of things, and I realised I knew nothing, almost nothing about radical 19th century Australian history. For example, did you know that 1 in 45 of the 190,000 convicts which were sent to Australia from England between 1788 and 1862, when transportation ended in West Australia, were political prisoners? 1 in 45. When you look at the radical history of the 19th century, over 3,500 activists and radicals were sent to the penal colony in Australia. It was a little bit like Guantanamo Bay, the US's Guantanamo Bay, because of the popular sentiment in England, it was very difficult to hang activists. So the next best thing you could do is send them to Australia. And we start off with Scottish nationalists like the Scottish Martyrs, which have been, well researched. Then you've got the Tulpuddle Martyrs, which again have been well researched. But what we forget is the thousands of people, Irish nationalists, swingers, Luddites, swingers, followers of Captain Swing, the last labourers' revolt in the 1830s, swinging in the wind. That was their symbol, to cause fear among the land-owning class, which was actually using agricultural machinery to displace them from work and force them into the cities. I know, nobody has. There were over 450,000 swingers sent to Australia in the 1840s. And guess who was the very gentleman who was responsible, the Attorney General in the, I think it was the Peel government, Lord Melbourne. The very own Lord Melbourne we now worship. He was responsible for the deportation of over 450 agricultural labourers who were involved in revolts against forced enclosures of the land, agricultural machinery, the fact there was no social security system. Before that, you had the Luddites, the weavers of northern England. The swingers were in southern England, they were farm labourers. The Luddites of northern England. Then you had the Irish rebels. And what I found fascinating was that of the 6 Scottish nationalists who were sent here, They were gentlemen of class. So Mr. Muir, who's the most famous, was allowed to take his manservant with him to Australia for his 14th year. But unfortunately, he didn't take his manservant on the rowboat when he went and joined the US ship to escape Australia. So what I'm just saying is, it was interesting how these different political rebels were treated by the ruling classes. If you were part of the ruling class yourself, and you were part of the Enlightenment, you were part of the, Jacobin, revolutionary forces, you were treated with quite respect. But if you were just a normal labourer who revolted against the system, you were treated in the most harshest way when you came here. So 1 in 45.
With the exception of the Scottish aristocracy, by the sounds of it, such as it was.
Well, yes.
Those of them that were radical.
Yeah. The interesting thing is that one of the Scottish nationalists was actually, this is what I found fascinating, I think his name is Marguerite, had a French connection. Because you've got to remember that French Revolution was the impetus for the British ruling class to become very concerned about their future and the fact that they needed to suppress
Put the window on.
anything, any revolt. This is the very early days. Because the other thing I learnt is that Mr. Marguerite was actually responsible in formulating the plan for the 1804 Vinegar Hill Rebellion, which almost toppled the government, where the Irish convicts, Irish nationalists were involved in the rebellion, which almost toppled the government of the day, the penal colony, and 13 of their members were hung within 48 hours of the revolt being put down. And the interesting thing is, we forget our history, but they didn't forget their history. Because in 1854, the password to get into the Eureka Stockade was what? Vinegar Hill. They remembered the revolt of 1804. So there was this memory. The other thing I learnt, in going through these historical records, the thing I learnt is how the demands they were making were exceptionally similar to the demands we make today. But the difference was that there were no mechanisms by which people could work up the right channels to have those demands instituted through a parliamentary process. So they were forced to use extra parliamentary means via which to pursue their demands. The other thing I learnt, which I should have known, I thought I knew a bit about Australian radical 19th century history, was that Australia was formulated on three principles. The first one was genocide, which we're all familiar with, although a lot of people don't accept that occurred, but we are familiar, as activists, we are familiar with that. The second thing was free land. Genocide led to the availability of land for the British ruling classes and nobility. Because in the first 50 years of colonisation, when it was a penal colony, it was only gentlemen, and this is not me making this up, this is in the record, gentlemen of name and quality who became squatters. It wasn't filthy people who needed a house, a roof over there, but it was gentlemen of name and quality. Normally the younger sons of the British aristocracy who had no future in Britain, or wayward sons who would come here and they'd be given huge tracts of land. In Brisbane, which I'm familiar with, one gentleman, whose name I'm forgotten, was given 200,000 acres of free land. Now, if you've got genocide and free land, there is one missing ingredient. You need labour. So the third major plank of Australian colonial history was free labour, and that was convict labour.
Slavery.
It is slavery, free labour. So you had genocide, free land, the gentleman of name and quality, free labour. And the interesting thing is we think that globalisation is something new, but it's not. The Industrial Revolution and the closure of the commons resulted in the growth of British capitalism and industry. But that was based on access to raw materials. And that raw material was wool. You know, the old concept that Australia used to ride the sheep's back. So that raw material was wool. So the gentlemen of name and quality had free labour, had free land, they had capital, they brought across sheep, the sheep bred, they shore the wool, send it to the woolen mills in Britain. So it's all part of this global empire, colonial empire. And they became very rich, very rich. So how did the convicts and the ticket of leave, what I've described, ticket of leave men and women, react to the situation? Another interesting fact I found during these last 10 presentations was the name James Strater, which again, to my chagrin, was not known to me, but I'm quite confident he's not known to 99.9% of Australians. Now, James Strater was a convict. He was assigned to the MacArthur estate.
Campbelltown in Sydney.
Well, he was assigned to them, but he'd been to another estate where he worked. And although they were supposed to be paid £5 a year, that money went in, you know, lodgings in inverted commas. But they also were given rations. And James Strater came from an estate where he was given, he was a big man, big physical man. They were given 17.5 pounds of wheat a week for their personal needs. Because remember, these men, and they were mainly men, were looking after 350 sheep. That was the minimum, right? They were no dogs, you know, no fences. They had to look after 350. If they lost sheep, the big troubles. So when he came to the MacArthur estate, his rations were reduced to 8 pounds of wheat a week. They were halved. So Mr. Strater, who had a good appetite, I understand, started to make a fuss. And he was a little bit rambunctious and started a little bit of a scene. And eventually, after 2 or 3 days of this, he was charged with the heinous crime of encouraging his master's servants to oblige him, not force him, oblige him to increase their wages, which were non-existent, and improve their rations. Now you think, so what? He didn't kill anybody. He was just shouting his mouth off. He was trying to encourage other people to join him. So this is the first noted example of an emerging trade union or union movement, because the charge was very simple: encouraging his master's servant to combine. And that is the essential element of trade unionism. People with similar trades or similar work combining to improve their situation. This was on the March 1822. He was charged with this offence. He came before 3 magistrates at Glebe, and he was sentenced, and you'll love this, to 500 lashes of the cat o' nine tail. If he survived the 500 lashes, he would then be held in solitary confinement for 4 weeks on bread and water. And if he survived that, he would then be sent to Port Macquarie. And Port Macquarie was the worst of the worst. It made Norfolk Island look like a picnic. In Port Macquarie, if you were really sick of the situation, you would kill the person there. They draw lots, kill somebody, and then they get hung. And that's how you escape. That's the only way you escaped in the early days. and he would serve the rest of his sentence at Port Macquarie. Now, I never found out what happened to Mr. James Strader, but I can assure you nobody survives 500 lashes in one setting. Now, interestingly, different workers were now beginning to combine because they had skills. Remember, the immigration, there wasn't open immigration. Immigration was restricted to men of, you know, as they say, of name and quality. So as people did their sentence, some of them have got little grants of land, 10, 20 acres. Others got into trades, and they started to form embryonic little trade unions around the country. So in order to put a stop to this, in 1828 we had a new law passed, which was the Masters and Servants Act, which in theory regulated the relationship between the master and the servant. Now, if the master did the wrong thing by you, the maximum penalty was 6 months' wages you have to pay the servant. You've got to prove it. But if the servant did the wrong thing by you, you would be jailed. That's how they kept workers in line.
And lobby.
And the interesting thing is, they were only paid in kind. There was no cash economy. You were paid food and lodgings. What happened is, these men and women who began to be released from the penal system, because most of them were on 7 to 14 years, didn't have the money to go back to England because you had to pay your own passage back. So they started small landholdings, got small grants, small businesses, and you won't believe this, Lee, or Jeremy, they had children. And has anybody heard the term currency lads and lasses?
Yes.
Yeah, well, the currency lads and lasses were the children of the free labourers, the convicts, who refused to work for food. They wanted money. They wanted cash money for their labour. And that encouraged a dissension within the community because they refused to work without being paid in cash. So what you saw is, after that, is you saw the formation of what was called an anti-transportation league. Because the dilemma is, there's no point going on strike or withdrawing your labour if you're competing against convicts who are given for free to employers. So the movement changed from a movement where unions came and went, you know, at the top of a hat, to a period where we saw the growth of the anti-transport league. And by the early 1850s, very early 1850s, you had riots in Melbourne when convict ships attempted to dock in the port of Melbourne. The convict ships were then sent to Sydney, and again you had riots, and then they were sent to Brisbane, which needed convict labour. And by 1850, I think it's 54, convict transportation to the eastern states had finished, which meant that working people, the currency lads and lasses, and their children, those who weren't involved, you know, in agricultural work, began to combine. They began to come together to improve their situation. This is when real migration began to occur in Australia in the 1850s. And the dilemma was, like today, it's fascinating when you look at history, that's what I loved about the 19th century, is when you look at it, it's like today, you had people being brought across by employers who were non-unionised, who were paid a pittance, who were brought across to the country to break the power that the emerging unions were having. Now this obviously created a lot of conflict. And what happened is, and this is the beauty, this is what I love about capital. Capital doesn't care about the colour of your skin. It cares how much money you can make. So what they brought across as the 80s and 60s and 70s, they were very keen to bring across Chinese bonded labourers because you could pay them a fifth of what you had to pay Australians at that particular point in time. Now, unfortunately, and this is the fascinating thing today in comparison, this is the fascinating thing today in comparison to in the 1850s and 60s and 70s, most Australian working organisations blamed the Chinese for their predicament. As we see amongst Australian working people today, it's the foreigner who is the problem, not the fact that corporations and their employers are those who use the foreigner to break the power that unions are able to exercise. Now, John Howard was brilliant. Brilliant man, I don't care what you say about him. To me, he was brilliant. I'll tell you why he was brilliant. He formulated two policies. While he talked about sovereign borders, he massively increased migration. He introduced brilliant. You've got to respect brilliance when you see it. Not even being sarcastic, because he took the wind out of the trade union movement. What he did is he introduced short-term labour contracts in this country and introduced temporary workers into the country. And that put a lid on the power that trade unions were able to exercise. And if you look at trade union membership today, where trade unions have basically been legislated out of existence, if you look at the private sector, it's less than 10%. Less than 10%. And it's about 15, 16 when you look at the public sector. Mainly, most of their, employees, apart from the CFMEU, are in the, the private sector. So let's get back to the 1870s. So what happened when they brought in cheap labour? Now remember, Australia was not a unified country, it was a number of colonies, right? There was New South Wales, there was Tasmania, blah, blah, blah. Trade unionists began to understand, radical activists began to understand that in order to stand up to what was happening, they had to cross colonial boundaries. They had to form links. Unionists in Queensland had to form links with unionists in New South Wales, Victoria and Tasmania. And the first intercolonial strike that occurred, where the whole of the East Coast was involved, was the Maritime Strike of 1871, which was based on the idea, simple idea, what they tried to introduce during the Maritime Strike in the 1990s here, was that all crews on ships had been replaced by Chinese workers who were paid 1/5 of the wage. Now, once again, what we saw was the anger of working people was towards the Chinese, as well as their employers. They saw the Chinese as the issue because they saw them as strike breakers. So what we saw is the introduction of this hatred. Now, interestingly, the only organisation in labour history in the 19th century that understood the situation and wrote about it and agitated against it was the Melbourne Anarchist Club, which put out material in Mandarin, in Lonsdale Street, Little Lonsdale Street, where there were many sweat workshops, because they understood that this was an issue of colonialism. If we go back 2 decades, the first written record that Aboriginal people, Indigenous people in this country, were victims of British colonialism. It was written by Raphael Carboni in 1855. We actually wrote an opera, believe it or not, called Gulbernia, because he lived for over a year with the Waffarong, which are the Indigenous owners of the Ballarat region. He was a shepherd before he became a miner, and he understood that he saw it as the effects of British colonialism. So what I'm saying is there's many strands in the 19th century, but most of Australian labour history in the 19th century is based on a misguided understanding of the situation. And if you go forward 150 years to 2024, it's the same situation. It's exactly the same. Cheap, non-unionised, overseas labour, which is used to break any ability of people to combine to improve their situation. And so the issue isn't, as people think, the colour of somebody's skin, which is an easy thing to pick on if you're in a workplace, because somebody can't speak the language properly. But the issue is the way employers are able to manipulate situations to improve their situation. I'll give you an example. This is true. I know you may find this hard to believe. I did. I had known this gentleman, who shall remain nameless, for 20 years. And he had a little manufacturing business. Employed about 50 people. Had apprentices. This is the 1990s. And he did the right thing by his workers. Nice, good employer. One day he went to see his friend at Barbecues Galore. And he said, "What are all these chinks doing here?" And he said, "Haven't you heard?" He said, "What?" He said, "Well, the government," this was the Howard government, has changed the rules. We can bring in these people legally on a short-term visa, offer them permanent residence in 4 or 5 years. We can pay them $1 more than the average, or the basic wage, or for the work they're doing. We can ensure they come to work an hour early and leave an hour late, not pay them. We charge them for food and board, and we actually make a profit on that. And we never have a day's dispute on the workplace. Within a month, that person, who I don't speak to anymore, had removed his entire workforce, not in the sales room, but in the manufacturing area, and replaced it with people they recruited in Beijing a few weeks earlier. And this happened across Australia. And before COVID-19, 1 in 7 Australian workers were on temporary work visas. And most of these people were being totally exploited by unscrupulous employers who are making hay. At the same time, we saw legislation go through Parliament which makes striking illegal in this country, except during the enterprise bargaining agreement period. And if you jump through 26 hoops and you're really good, you can do a 4-hour strike, as we saw the V-line train drivers just do at 4 o'clock in the morning. All right? And if you move an inch, your union gets bankrupted. It's very simple, easy. Because, see, most Australian workers are now non-unionised. And the way you achieve that is, and this is where Mr. Howard again was brilliant, is by introducing short-term contracts. Over 40% of Australians are now on short-term contracts. And I'm not talking about fly-by-night, bodgy restaurant or bodgy education jobs, but real jobs. And every 2 years or every year your contract gets renewed, and you haven't been a good boy and girl, it doesn't get renewed, and most likely you won't get another job in that industry. It's just like an unofficial blacklist. So there's very little difference between the 19th century and the 21st century because we've forgotten what happened during the 20th century. The thing is that push by workers in the 19th century, which resulted in major losses in terms of strike activity, like the 1891 shearers' strike was a disaster as far as the shearers were concerned. And again, that was based on, believe it or not, contract labour. Piecework, contract labour. That was the 1891 shearers' strike. People went to jail for long periods. It's all about contract labour. That's what it was about. People were used to, going to a shearing shed, getting so much if they sheared so many sheep. But introducing contract labour broke the nexus of the union movement. So then the union movement gravitated to parliamentary politics. And we saw the emergence of parliamentary politics. And that was the lesson of the 19th century. That unless you had a strong workers' movement, you were going to lose consistently when you faced employers, when there were legions of scabs that could be used to break a strike because there was no social security system. So if you didn't work, you starved. Unless you had a big family. That's why people had big families, You starved. No social security system. So what happened in the 20th century? We'll go from the 19th to the 20th to the 21st. Because to me, the 21st century parallels the 19th century. And we forgot what happened in the 20th century. There were many disputes, but over 50% of workers were unionised. They were able to actually bring the country to its knees, not in terms of disputes which were unnecessary, but disputes to improve not only their condition, their personal situation, but the situation of other workers. Why do you think social security benefits were introduced after World War II? People have gone to war, they'd sacrificed themselves, they died, they were injured, and they came back, they expected a little bit more. How do you think public housing started? If you look at, in Melbourne, which I'm familiar with, if you look at pictures of the MCG and the Botanic Gardens, they're full of tents of returned servicemen and women who had nowhere to stay, after being at war for 2, 3, 4 years. That prodded both conservative forces and the Labor Party into introducing a public housing sector which was based on the idea that if you couldn't afford to enter the private marketplace, you deserved to have a roof over your head. We saw after World War II introduction of many social security benefits. The only social security benefit that was really useful, which came in after World War I, was the blind pension, which is the only pension which is not actually, assessed. You can earn as much as you like.
Means tested.
Means tested. It was the only one that wasn't means tested. So again, in the 19th century, you had all these struggles up to the 1970s, even the early 1980s, where we saw major improvements. I remember when I was 18 or 19 and I started a medical course at university, for the 3 months I had off, I'd go to the local industrial estate, knock on the door, ask for a job, get a job that afternoon, and they'd say, you'd say, I'll start tomorrow, and they say, no, you're starting this afternoon. That's what it was like. No, seriously. And you got a reasonable return. That was like. A single worker, remember this, in the 1970s, could buy a quarter-acre block and a house on an average wage within 7 years. 7 years. So what happened? What happened? What happened to all that struggle? What happened?
The good guys lost.
No, there's no good guys or bad guys in the universe, in my opinion. There's just people.
It's a metaphor.
I know, I'm just being facetious. There's no good guys, there's no bad guys. What happened? We forgot where we came from. We forgot how we got there. We forgot how we got a universal healthcare system during the Whitlam era. We forgot so much, and that we forgot what James Strater knew, that in order to succeed, you needed to combine. So today, we have a skeletal union system which won't be resuscitated until people begin to remember what they've lost. Because today you need two people in a household working full time, right? Two people in a household working full time to pay off a mortgage or pay rent. In the 70s, because of a strong trade union movement, you needed one person for 7 years.
Of people over 40
Yeah.
within 15 kilometres of the major capital cities
Cities.
on the East Coast
Yeah.
would never be able to afford
And it'll get worse.
property.
Yeah, yeah. Look, we understand
That's
that.
the Australian housing and
Yeah,
development
yeah. Look,
Institute.
I'm not making any of this up.
No,
You can
it's
check
not.
it. You can check it. The thing is, but why do we allow it to happen? And there's a number of reasons we've allowed it to happen. One is that we have been totally incorporated today in the economic system we have. Before, most people were wage earners, not investors. Today, everybody is an investor through superannuation. And as I said this morning on the radio program, superannuation is the biggest con since the jolly fat man was kidnapped, by Coca-Cola. And they changed his robes from green and white, from winter to green, to spring, to red and white. Right? Yeah, biggest con. Now look at this, superannuation. Supposed to, we are now expected to, you work your guts out, you pay your taxes, you obey the law, you're a good boy and girl, which hopefully none of you are, and what do you get at the end? The ability to pay for your own retirement.
Yeah.
But actually the ability to be ripped off by the private sector. What is the biggest growing sector? The aged care sector. So what we've seen is four things, and you're all aware of this, and I know when I am videotaping this. We've seen four things happen in the last 40 to 50 years, which have turned the world on its head, which has incorporated us into the system. One is superannuation. The next one is short-term contracts. The third one is a legislation which has basically outlawed any activity which actually promotes working people's activities, to improve this, to combine to improve their situation. And then on top of that, you've got the four horsemen of the apocalypse. You've got deregulation. People say, isn't deregulation wonderful? Well, a lot of regulations have come in to actually protect people, because the story of the 19th and the early 20th century was a story of a transformation of the state, because the state historically has been the mechanism by which the government of the day, or those in power, retain their power. And if you look at the legislative agenda, that's what the state was about. But the 19th and early 20th century, the century of revolution reform, changed the dynamic of the state. It forced the ruling classes to use the state to improve the situation of working people, or there'd be wholesale revolution. So it changed. So by the 1970s, we had the state involved in providing essential services, we had the state involved in providing healthcare, the state in infrastructure, public service, it goes on and on. But then what we saw is the great revolution of the 20th century. It's not us, we're the losers, you're quite right. The state, and we're the losers because we believe the propaganda. We believe the propaganda that if we deregulate, remove regulations we've put in place to protect people, that profits would increase and those profits would trickle down to us. Then we believe, trickle down economics. Then we believed the fact that, not only do we need to deregulate, we need to privatise. We need to give away, that's right, give away assets which had been created through the blood, sweat and tears of our parents and grandparents and great-grandparents to provide essential services to the community, like the Commonwealth Serum Laboratory, which was established in 1911, and the Commonwealth Bank, which was established, I think, a year later, give away to the private sector because there'd be increased competition and we'd be better off. Then we believed corporatisation is the way forward. I don't know if any of you have gone to a major shopping centre. It's very hard to see any shops that are not part of some corporate network, and then globalisation, sending work off to countries where labour is exploited to the hilt, was the way forward. But we believed it because we were all going to benefit. We believed the propaganda as a people, and we believed the propaganda because every moment, every day, we receive the same message. The same message constantly, every moment, every day. And it's all about private investment for private profit. So if you look at younger people today, it's about shares. It's about short-term contracts. And the important thing is we now have both feet tied to the housing affordability equation. Because in the past, I'll give you a simple example. In 1983, with the help of the bank, obviously, I was able to purchase a little home in Richmond for $42,500, right? $42,500, 1983. I kept it for a few years and then flogged it off for a profit. But I saw the same house, which was tilted because the underpinnings had broken. Wooden house, no backyard, 3 bedrooms, tilt, little corridor. I think you may have visited us once, Jeremy, at that property in Richmond. Yeah. And
filing cabinets.
now, how much do you think it sold for in 2017? It didn't even have a paint job. Same house.
1.97.
Close, 1.6 million. Now, it went up. Wages went up 7 times, but housing prices went up 45 times because housing is now a commodity. So if you've got people tied to the financial sector and they're spending 30 to 40% of their disposable income to keep a roof over their heads, and they cough the wrong way, and they're on short-term contracts, and they're relying on their so-called superannuation at the end of their life for a good life, you begin to understand. Anna Hexted, if I got the Hexted, I did get a free education, Anna Hexted, you begin to understand that it's a little bit hard to be struggling for a fairer share of the cake if you're tied down like Gulliver. And that's what's happened. People are now tied. The only ones a little bit of financial independence are the baby boomers, who've actually been able to acquire a little bit of capital because of the gains of the 60s and 70s. And they weren't part of that new wave. But the trouble is, I knew the battle was lost. I was sitting in a cafe in Brunswick. No, Coburg. I don't like Brunswick. Coburg, right? Near Bell Street. Nice little cafe, nothing spectacular. And 2 road workers, I reckon late 50s, wander in and they sit down to the table next to me. These are road workers, all right? These aren't capitalists, right? These aren't property owners, well, they may have been. And they started talking about their accountants, their portfolio, their investments, their superannuation. And I thought, we lost it. We lost it. This is the so-called working class. It's the same now with highly paid trade unionists and tradespeople. What do they do with their disposable income? They send their kids to private schools. They take out private health insurance. It's a totally different mentality. So the mentality in the 19th century was a mentality of mutual aid because there was no safety net. People have to rely on each other. And the great tragedy that a lot of people remember is the demutualisation of many of these mutual organisations, like the Benevolent Society, the Odd Fellows, the the New South Wales, RACV or the NSRAV. At least the RACV here didn't demutualise, it's still a mutual society. The AMP, the Australian Mutual Provident Fund, a mutual fund which was set up by workers to look after them in times of need. All these were demutualised and given over to the private sector, and you got $400 in your pocket for your little share of and you were really happy until you blew it at the races. So the mentality has changed, conditions have changed. The 19th century, a period of struggle and progress. The 20th century, the first half up to the 70s, the first 3/4, a period of consolidation and improvement. The last quarter of the 20th century and the first quarter of the 21st century are a period that we've gone backwards. So I think the 19th century has a lot to teach us. And those radical activists, and again, this would be about 1% of the community. I'm not talking about thousands or tens of thousands, but people had ideas which they put into the community. And that's what it was about. It was about ideas. There's no ideas today. And to a large degree, that's our fault. Because we haven't understood how society has changed. We haven't understood that this is not the 19th century or the 20th century. This is the 21st century. And the dilemma is that what I am seeing in Australian society in 2024, which is nearly here, really frightens me. Because what I'm seeing now is because of increasing dissatisfaction in the community, I'm seeing the growth of political movements fanned by so-called libertarian elements in society, fanned by the Liberal National Party to a significant degree, that are widening the rifts that exist in Australian society. We're getting back to the period where the other becomes the issue. And we forget that we find ourselves in this situation because of the concentration of power and wealth in fewer and fewer hands. I mean, I usually think I'm a reasonably, heartless bastard. But I get a tear in my eye, don't tell anybody this, when I see the Smith family ad on television raising money to send Australian kids to public schools. That is the depth of the depravity we find ourselves in. Victoria was the first place in the world to introduce free compulsory education in 1872 as a result of the Eureka Rebellion 20 years earlier. Premier Hills, who Hillsville's named after, when he died, people stood shoulder to shoulder from the centre of the city to St Kilda Cemetery and back to honour what he had done in terms of introducing free compulsory education. 646 primary schools were built within 12 months because there was a push from the people. And if we can't, and it's difficult when you've got political movements which are widening the rifts. I mean, I was speaking today to somebody on Radical Australia, Dr. Wolfram. He's interesting because he was talking about ethnicity and how ethnicity is used to divide us. And everywhere we look, although there are all these laws, divisions open. I'll give you an example, simple example, I was in Ballarat on the 3rd of December. We were doing the Reclaim the Radical Spirit of the Eureka Rebellion celebrations, right? And I got back to Trades Hall after the cemetery bit. And Brett Edgerton, he's the secretary of Ballarat Trades Hall who we work with, said, there's these people in black masks wandering around Ballarat, right? Okay. So I thought I'd go and have a chat, have a look. And I can't believe it. 30 people dressed in black, masks, walking through Ballarat, terrorising. I had information they just terrorised the people at the Sovereign Hill, and they attempted to terrorise the staff at the Eureka Centre, marching around, big banner, Australia for the white man, you know, crappy on, being chaperoned, not escorted, chaperoned by the police through the streets of Ballarat. There are many laws that could have, so I stood in their way, right? I just stood there in their way. No, it doesn't take any courage because you've got police everywhere. Hopefully you don't get pushed down, right? And they had to divide to go past me, right? Right? I mean, I'm just thinking to myself, this is totally ludicrous. This is what's happening today. We are widening the rifts. We are allowing this type of situation to occur. We're allowing race and colour and language and culture and ethnicity to divide us. We have forgotten who the common enemy is. And we are now seeing what I call the neo-fascist toy boys being tolerated by Victoria Police. They could have been stopped on a number of things, you know. Obviously they had, I don't blame the Ballarat Police, they had orders from higher up. And the funny thing, this is what I really love, at the end of it was, the police car comes up to me, all right, I was just standing in the street, you know, and he says, don't aggravate them. And I said, what? He said, don't aggravate them. Go away. Go. It was my fault, because I was aggravating them, you know.
Did you go?
Well, they'd gone, they marched past me. I wasn't going to hang around, I had lunch to have. Right. But I'm a practical human being. But what I'm just saying is, it's a humorous, but it's dangerous. Because what we ask, because I live in the country, I live 200 kilometres from Melbourne. And what these neo-fascist toy boys were doing is what people are thinking. I live in an electorate. No, you don't understand. I hate to be cruel. I live in an electorate which is named after Sir Doug Nicholls, right? It was the electorate which elected into the Legislative Council what's her name? I've forgotten. She's so irrelevant to me. A Pauline Hanson candidate to the Legislative Council of Victoria. We have a senator who represents, who do you think? Do you know? Who is it? Come on, we have a really interesting senator. Not
You're
just...
talking about Clive Palmer's senator.
That's right. Victoria's Clive Palmer senator. The electorate of Nicholls, which is named after Doug Nicholls, one of the most prominent Aboriginal activists in this country, 80% of the people there voted against the voice.
Were they landowners?
No, they're ordinary people. This is what I'm saying. This is what I'm saying. This is the lesson. That once we're divided on these relatively superficial bases, we just spend all our life fighting amongst each other over relatively nothing. While those who exercise power continue to exercise power and set the parliamentary agenda. Why do you think the Whitlam Labor government had such a radical agenda, a reformist agenda I should say? Because people forced it to have a reformist agenda. There is no movement. It's just so fragmented. It's all about, oh, I'm black and I'm a sovereign black and that's what I want. You know, I'm gay and I'm gay. You know, and I'm this and I'm that and I've got two toes on one leg. You know, and that's my identity. It's all about identity politics. There's no longer a universal element to the struggle. And if you don't get that universal element, you get nowhere. I mean, none of it challenges capitalism. You've got the pink dollar. You've got the green dollar. You know? So all I'm saying is there are lessons to be drawn. It's a fascinating.
The national figure was still 64. So they're very sizable slice of the population.
What, 60-40?
In the referendum.
Yeah, 60 against the 44.
That's right.
That's not really a sizable. That is a huge loss in the referendum.
Absolutely. A massive.
Considering
massive
the
defeat.
advertisements.
But it's still 40% of the population who think differently.
Yeah, but mainly
Well,
in
that's what
certain regions.
Some Australians.
No,
Not all Australians.
in certain regions. Every region voted against it. Except certain. And the interesting thing was, it's
It's true.
it is the
The ones who voted
no,
for
the more
focused
radical.
in the urban centres and in the inner city.
Yeah. The interesting thing is, it's those that have got economic independence, right? The Teals, the Greens of the world, who are not being threatened. And that's the whole point. The people that are threatened by migration and who feel threatened are those who are not economically independent. And unless you break that nexus, that they become economically independent, they will continue to be threatened. Because who's the person who loses their job when you've got 1 in 7 workers on temporary work visas? It's not the CEO or the bureaucrat in the government that's raking in 150, 200, 300 grand a year. It's those workers, and they're the ones that feel threatened. It's all very well to be economically independent and have a good job, and you can vote for all these positive things. And that's the dilemma we face. It's not just a matter of numbers, it's a matter of who are the ones who bear the cost. Who bore the cost for inflation and increased interest rates? Homeowners, renters, small business. Sorry? No, small business. I'm sorry, 5 million people are in small business out of 12 million people. Small business, if you remember your radical anarchist history, the small business sector was the engine room of the Spanish Revolution.
The petit bourgeoisie.
Yeah. They were the engine room because they understood that their slavery could be overcome by them combining and having mutual aid and working together. They understood that because that was the situation. See, we've got this tradition. Well, I'll just go one more thing before I shut up because I know you're getting bored and you want to ask questions. One more thing. See, I don't believe in traditional class analysis. That's a load of bullshit.
Sorry, traditional
Class analysis. Marxian class analysis. I don't believe in it. It's total bullshit. Total, unadulterated, Marxist bullshit. And I'll tell you why. There's only 4 classes in Australian society. There's the bottom of the heap, which is social security beneficiaries, right? Yeah? Bottom of the heap. So 1/3 of the population relies on social security benefits to survive. That's less than, in majority of cases, $600 a week. Okay? You've got to find your rent, pay your food, pay your electricity, pay your insurance, pay your vet bills, pay your mistress, pay your toy boy. It's an expensive world.
You're going to have to learn how to save money.
Exactly. I mean, then you've got the one we all agree on, the 1% that own the means of production, distribution, exchange, and communication. They're not in a Marxist analysis. Then you've got a new class which crosses colour barriers. There's no such thing as a blue collar worker, a white collar worker. It doesn't occur. There are 2 types of workers in this country. There are workers who at the end of the day have enough disposable income to invest in shares, stocks and homes. Tradespeople, some professionals, members of the CFMEU, the list no, seriously, the list goes on and on. These people have disposable income. That's your most important class. That is the spearhead of the 1% that own the means of production, distribution, exchange. 9% of Australians have significant assets, whether it's a second home, whether it's stocks and shares. And it doesn't matter what the bloody work you do, it's how much cash you've got at the end of the week. Then you've got the bulk of workers, the losers, you and me, right? The losers, where, I'm a doctor. I've bulk billed all my life. And I'm No, I preferred I wouldn't. I would have been retired now. I'm still working. I'm still working 2 days a week because I'm a fucking loser for being nice, bulk
Yeah, but
billing
you're
people.
lovely with it.
No, I'm still a loser economically. So if you don't have disposable income at the end of the week, and all you've got is enough to pay your bills, you're part of that class. There are 4 classes: the 1%ers, the 9%ers, the bulk of the population, social security
That's
beneficiaries.
actually not too far from traditional class analysis.
I know, but they use all the fancy words, you know,
Yeah.
like petty bourgeois,
Yeah,
blue
yeah.
collar, white collar. You know, I'm blue collar. You know,
Yeah,
I earn
yeah.
200 grand a week. I mean, a year. I'm blue collar. I've got a home, an investment property. Come on.
Yeah.
You don't have to be related to the Queen in Australia to get rich. That's the difference over there. They're born into the land with
Well,
gentry
unless you're the
and
prime
they're
minister, unless you're the
aristocracy.
prime minister, but that's a different story. So, questions. Look, I'm sorry, but look, this year I'm going to do something in early March. I haven't decided on the day to celebrate James Straker, to celebrate the beginning of the Australian trade union movement, because I think he deserves a little full stop in our memory, collective memory. Because I'm sure most trade unionists wouldn't even know who James Straker was, let alone trades and labour councils. No idea, but charged with, and I love this, what is it? Encouraging his master servants to combine, to oblige him, you don't want to use the word force because it means you've got some power, to oblige him to improve their wages, which they can get, to increase their wages and improve their rations. And for that, he gets 500 lashes in one sitting, 4 weeks bread and water, solitary confinement, he survives that, and then the rest of his sentence in Macquarie Harbour. That's the threat he was to the system at that particular point in time, because it threatened the free labour which gentlemen of name and quality used to enrich themselves as a result of the genocide which occurred in this country to free up the land to the landed gentry. So we do owe an obligation to remember the past, and even if we can't change the future, and even if we're totally irrelevant and totally marginal, we do owe them that obligation because of what they did. All right, questions?
Yeah, what influence had the GATT agreement have on all this stuff?
The GATT agreement?
Yes.
Don't know.
Well, do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I know what you're talking
Yeah.
about.
I mean, they agreed to sell anything that was sellable.
Yeah,
In other words, privatise everything.
yeah. But that's what's happened in the last 50 years.
And the union movement sold that
Yeah.
idea as well.
Yeah, but we all accepted look. It's not an individual responsibility. It's a collective responsibility. We believed, the majority of us, I'm not including anybody here, believe that if you privatise, if you corporatise, if you globalise, if you deregulate, everybody will benefit.
Yeah, that
We
GATT was
believed
the
it.
start of that.
That's right. We believed it, and we saw the Hawke-Keating government were the
Multi-skilling and all that stuff.
they were the front runners. They were the shock troops. What Fraser couldn't introduce, they were able to introduce. But again, it's a matter of, it's understandable that you believe those that you've placed in a leadership position because they have promised you a certain thing, and that's the dilemma. I mean, Whitlam had 2 choices in 75, 11th of November. He could have told people to get out in the streets, but he was concerned about the ensuing bloodshed that would have occurred, because they would have. There would have been no hesitation on the state using its military apparatus to suppress any dissent, and they made the decision just to acquiesce. Now, questions, please. It doesn't have to be any. I'm happy if there aren't any.
Just ask, these sessions in the last 12 months, you did French Revolution and how it's similar to
No,
us.
I did. What I did is the influence that the Paris Commune
Oh, okay.
had on Australian radical politics.
Oh, okay.
I did that, and there is a video presentation, but I know you don't like videos.
Yeah, no, that's why I came tonight, so I don't have to go anywhere near the internet.
Well,
Dump the internet right where the
well, I've done
friend.
10 of these,
Yeah.
and I'm actually videoing myself trying to save money tonight. But I've done 10 of these that are up on the net, you know, which people can look at, and you know they can take it or leave it. Because they see the French Commune is really the only real example of a major social revolution which was successful for a short period of time in 1871, and it resulted in the deaths of people greater than we're seeing in Gaza today in a small confined area, where every man who survived was lined up and every 10th one was shot publicly just to teach the working class and the intelligentsia that were involved in the revolt. This is what happens. 5,000 were actually deported to Noumea, New Caledonia, and they were placed on the Ile de Pins, where they had their own thing. A number of them escaped to Australia and had an influence on the Australian radicals in the 70s. Now, Louise Michel, the only anarchist I know whom a public building is named after a subway station in Paris, like Louise Michel, when amnesty was declared, I think about 8 years after they'd been in prison, she came to Sydney, right? And she wanted a fast clipper back to France. And the French consul was horrified. She said, well, if you don't give me a fast clipper back to France, I'm going to hold a series of public lectures all over Australia about the Paris Commune. And she got her fast clipper back to France. True story. You know, so what I'm saying is there was an influence. And if you look at Melbourne history in the 1870s and 1880s, people figures like Dr. Maloney, who was the Labor member, the radical Labor member for Melbourne for over 40 years, just don't think the Greens is something new. He was greatly influenced by a number of communards who set up shop, had a gymnasium here in Melbourne in the 1870s. So there's all this cross-fertilisation. Because as I said at the beginning, 1 in 45 convicts was a political refugee. They were either Irish nationalists, Scottish nationalists, swingers, which are followers of Captain Swing, which was a mythical leader based on the noose and the people swinging on the noose, of agricultural labourers who were fighting to retain their jobs against mechanisation in southern England in the late 1830s, 84. The Luddites from the 1820s, you know, northern England, the weavers of northern England. So that, and in many ways, the Tolpuddle martyrs, which were, you know, everybody talks about them, but they were sent back. So these people, and then you've got the Eureka Rebellion. You've got to remember, the Eureka Rebellion didn't occur because of local homegrown radicals. The Eureka Rebellion because the flotsam and jetsam of the world, or at least the Western Europe and Eastern Europe, came here to find their fortune. Rebels and revolutionaries from the failed revolutions in 1848, Chartists from England, you know, Irish nationalists, Dutch people fighting for independence, Flemish independence, they all came here. Yes,
And all
Jewish
the political
people.
prisoners
Yeah.
you spoke of.
What's that?
All the political prisoners you spoke of.
Yeah,
too.
yeah. Political prisoners. So 1 in 45. Obviously, a lot of the convicts were people who were products of the environment they found themselves in. Because I think it was in 1728, 200, could you imagine this? 200 offences were made hanging offences. Because the government was concerned about the revolts which were occurring in the countryside, and so they needed something by which to control people. And remember, Lord Melbourne, the great Lord Melbourne, was the very architect, the Attorney General, who was responsible for the arrest of over 2,000 of Captain Swing's followers. 240 were sentenced to hang, 19 were hung, 456 or so were sent here. So obviously they have an impact on the convict population. You don't forget your ideas when you're deported.
We were brought up on the French Revolution, well, I was anyway, on how they went too far, and it was the dangers of revolutions, and they all go south. At the time of, now it was Thomas Paine who pointed out this out, it's not my point. At the time of the French Terror, London was known as the city of gallows, because the roads were clogged with the corpses of hanged men and women. The ongoing terror against the poor dwarfed French terror and was far longer. And yet we were brought up on the French Revolution and sometimes ill-judged executions of the French Revolution, but not on the terror against the poor at the time in England.
See, the other thing about the French Revolution and what occurred, what was interesting, was the fact that the terror only began after the King's Louis XIV supporters marched on. All these foreign governments marched on Paris, and they were defeated, and that's what brought on the terror. That's why he was executed. That's why they were executed. We tend to forget that. We tend to romanticise. I mean, we live good lives.
Well, it's the importance. I think it really brings up the importance of history, and that was part of our political background. Is that particular, take on the French Revolution and the Charles Dickens, and I remember actually reading the storming of the Bastille was a very silly thing, really. Of the Bastille was a very silly thing, really, because there were only 7 prisoners there at the time, and one of them was the Marquis de Sade. I mean, seriously, but. That wasn't. They actually didn't storm the Bastille to free the prisoners. They stormed the Bastille because troops were being moved into Paris, and that was a stronghold.
That's right.
So look, I guess there I'm just wanting to say I really agree on the importance of history because it makes context. What I really think about a lot at the moment in the twilight of most of our lives, except yours here, is what to do now. Because
That's right.
I know a Trotskyist friend of mine goes on my shoulder about how people are now non-organisable, not just politically, but your stamp club or whatever.
That's right.
People aren't clubbable anymore, and that's the basis that was the basis of unionism and so on. Is that people were prepared to combine in general, not necessarily for political resistance, but were people prepared to work in.
It's what every organisation will tell you. We can't get young members. Well, because they don't need us. They don't need to combine. They have virtual media. They have asocial media. They have their silos. They've got so many distractions. What distractions did we have in the 1970s when we were revolted? Minimal. You've got tons of distractions, but ultimately, I think human beings, we're our DNA. And what made us the most successful predator on the planet is the fact that we cooperated together. What we're seeing now is a breakdown of cooperation, and if there is, in my opinion, a breakdown in technology, that's when we will see change. And it's got to. Because what are people going to do? You can't look at your phone.
They have to learn to cut and paste with scissors and glue. That's
Well, no, look what's happening in North Queensland. Everybody says, isn't it wonderful how Australians come together during... Everybody bloody comes together during a period of crisis. Because people understand, look what's happening in Gaza. People understand that you've got to come together during a period of crisis to survive. We've forgotten that because we think we are no longer human. We think we are part of the machine. Not just victims of the machine, but actually the machine. And I think unless there's a breakdown in technology, there will be no change. Because technology, there's enough distraction there,
Of course, the situation's talked about this sort of thing back in the 60s.
That's right.
Maybe it's something to learn there.
Yeah, there is something, yeah. Any other questions? It is Christmas, you are allowed to be happy. Yeah. Look, people say, why do you do this, Joe? Aren't you cynical? Hard-boiled egg? Bastard? No. I'm a devotee of hope. Now, hope, and this is my definition, nobody else's, but you can use it, is the love child of desire and expectation. The desire for change and the expectation that change will occur. We need, in our own personal lives, to encourage that desire for change. We don't need to nail ourselves to the expectation that change will occur, because if we do, we will go mad. Because most likely won't occur during my lifetime. Maybe during Paul's lifetime. Maybe during Gaz's lifetime. But I think looking around here at all you young people, that the world relied on us. Although there's a gentleman out the back who looks pretty young and a bit glum. How old are you? Oh!
Baby.
Well, we'll put all our expectations on your shoulders. You happy with that? Good on you, mate. Come and join us. Come in closer.
And in about 40 years, think about this table full of people and realise you're just one of them.
But you'll be the only one that'll be alive. Hopefully.
Yeah, we'll
If
all be
if I may just offer
Yes.
comment. Joe and I first crossed paths in the
You
campaign
might still be alive in 40
to
years.
save Julian Assange,
Ah, yes.
and that was the first time I heard Joe speak. And subsequently, another event like this, I think it was in the gardens, I think, Footscray Gardens. Thereafter, we were folks and we were talking again, just chatting about politics. Firstly, I'm sorry I've been so busy, I haven't been to any of these presentations before, but I would just like to live in them now and salute the fact that we've all just observed someone speak without an or an or any other rhetorical device, without notes, flawlessly, giving an extraordinary, in terms of detail and scope, presentation on a vital piece of not just Australian history, but the history of Australia, of the international working class. The only, so first of all,
This is what happens. You get praise, then comes the criticism. That's all right.
Exactly.
This is a question, by the
I
way.
did begin by saying it was a comment.
Yes.
The only, and it's purely my obsessional compulsive fixation, the only thing that I had any issue with, as I think they probably picked up on, was the characterisation of that grubby-looking individual known as John Howard as being brilliant. Because for me, he was not brilliant at all. He was, in fact, at best, a rudimentary pragmatist. And his political perspectives were simply a casting on the policies of the ruling class throughout Europe between the wars. He simply did. And we all know they only have one weapon other than their military arsenals. They only have one political weapon, it's divide and conquer. It's divide and conquer. It always, only and ever is the fundamental engine of political struggle, is the ability to inflict divide and conquer strategy on the enemy. The ruling class did it to the working class of Europe between the wars, and I think Joe will take any issue with that. Specifically in Britain, I'm thinking of the German Communist Party, I'm thinking of the British coal miner strikes at 9/26, the general strike and so on. All of it defeated as a consequence of the use of cheap foreign labour. To do what? To divide the working class. Ethnicity grounds, religious grounds, whatever grounds possible, but to divide and conquer. And we're still seeing it. You talk about distractions of the 21st century. I couldn't agree with you more. The current generation, of course, while they're living in the land of honey, milk and honey, where they come from the subcontinent of Asia or anywhere else as ground-level workers, exploited here while they were alive. Why is it that given the objective conditions being so fruitful, there's no radicalisation of what's left of our working class leadership, the trade union movement or the Labor Party.
Because they're trying to survive. Now, I'll get back to my...
Unless the objective conditions, until the objective conditions mature, this is my simple take on it, then a radical leadership won't emerge. The objective conditions, once they occur, I'm very confident because this generation of human beings are more informed than we ever were, I would suggest.
Yeah, that's an irony.
And, well, yes it is. That's the nature of dialectics, of course. You have to hold the opposites fast. My optimism comes from the fact that if the objective conditions change, then the ruling class better watch out, because this generation, I'm talking about a generation of my daughter, she's 41, but in subsequent generations, they will take no prisoners.
Well, I will disagree.
They're in the lesson.
I will disagree.
I would disagree on that.
I know you will.
Because history shows us...
Unless the objective conditions are there.
No. History shows us when the objective conditions change, the black shirts take over, unless there has been organisation beforehand. And that's what we have.
Leadership of the working class.
Well, not leadership, just organisation, and we don't have that.
Well, you can't have an organisation.
And I'll tell you why. And I'll tell you why John Howard is brilliant. I'll tell you why John Howard is brilliant.
I was just involved with Save the Preston Mark, short interjection. Save the Preston Mark campaign, right? And a fantastic community organisation. We won the battle, right? All the traders now have 5 years lease. Terratio has pulled his head in. Now that didn't happen just like that. The objective conditions were there, but leaders had to emerge to do the organising. No leaders, no organisation. Sorry, that's management theory, that's not me.
That's fair enough. I'll agree not to go down that path, but what I'm trying to say is John Howard is brilliant. Not because he divides us, anybody can do that. Any Tom, Dick and Harry can do that. He is brilliant because he radically changed the thinking of the Australian people. They all think of themselves now, not as workers, but as investors. And that's the genius. That is the genius of John Howard. He changed the thinking of the population. And that's, to me, that's why he's a genius. Adolf Hitler and Mussolini and Pol Pot, all in their own ways, what they were able to do is, especially Hitler and Mussolini, I'll leave Pol Pot out of it, because that was brute force. They were able to change the thinking of the people. Now, in every one of those situations, you had strong socialist movements, strong anarchist movements. Why do you think the Nazi colours are red and black? They stole them off the syndicalists, right? They stole them off the syndicalists. But those movements failed because they were able to capture the popular imagination. And that's what Howard, not Morrison or all those other losers, but that's what Howard was brilliant at. He actually changed the attitude of the Australian people. He understood his people.
I'd only add one qualification of that. He could not have done it without Frank and Kerry Packer.
No, I agree 100%. I agree. You always need allies. And if you're pushing their barrow, they're going to push your barrow.
The ruling class control the information systems.
No, not anymore.
Then.
But these days,
That's why I have faith
I'm more interested
in because I don't have that control anymore.
I'm more interested, let's say, in toy cars. And I can look at every toy car I like on the world on the internet. I can spend the next 6 weeks looking at toy cars. That's the difference. Are you looking at toy cars, Paul?
No. First of all, I'd like to say congratulations for taking on the fascists.
No, the police were there. I wouldn't know otherwise. I'm not stupid. Right.
I've been involved in anti-fascist activities. I must say, though, I am a traditionalist as you probably know, when it comes to class analysis. I understand what you're saying, and yes, I'm a blue-collar worker. I work with blue collar workers. I do think that the Marxist definition, despite being an anarchist, is pretty spot on. I understand your idea about small business, but most small businesses, they get into business, their aim is to make profit. They aim to become big business. Their interests are different to ours. We're exploited. We sell our labour. If there's a strike, blue collar workers who own properties, maybe even more than one, will still strike with us renters who are members of RAHU and a trade union. And look, their interests and our interests will be the same. For a small business, their interests, they fit into this, they've got the right ideas, like they'll vote green, they may even go to a rally, but when it comes to paying their workers, their interests will be with their class, which is different to our class. They want to make profit, they want to become the big fish. They're not, I'm sorry to say, they're not our allies.
They're 100% our allies. 90% of small businesses fail within 5 years in Australia. 90% within 5 years.
Because they're only ordinary people having a red hot go again in a slope that goes like
Many
that.
small businesses don't employ labour.
Yeah.
They're micro businesses.
We haven't had a long strike for years and years and years, but when we do, it's small restaurants and so on, small grocers, they feed workers.
Yeah, I understand that.
Isn't it
it's more complex
60%
than
of
that.
employment is by a small business?
Yeah, you're living in the 19th century, Paul.
Yeah.
And
I
can
suggest you
just
come
tell
into the
something?
21st
Still in the
century.
19th
You're
century
sitting
too.
right next to a small business owner who I've had for 32 years, and I look after my staff with all of my heart and soul. And I just sat here and nearly choked because grandiose sweeping statements are a real pain in the arse, aren't they? No matter who they're being addressed to. No,
Let's not
no,
argue.
I'm not. Hey,
It's
no,
not
you're not. You're
interesting
partly
enough on
cute.
that- on
You're
that stat.
being really
The
sorry.
United States is largely mythical.
But I just thought I should
60% of the
tell you,
population,
we're not
working
all
population
assholes.
in the United
Please
States.
back off. Because I could have said something real shitty about millennials, but I didn't.
You don't own that place in, you don't own that place in North. You're not.
No.
I suspect if you look at all the European economies, you'll find two different pictures. Small
No, I'm not
businesses
sorry.
are the
Oh,
engine
all
room,
right.
which none of us invented, not like and that's what makes it so fragile.
Yeah,
So that's why I'm
small-
optimistic about it.
Look, small business, I'm afraid, small and micro
You've got to
business,
understand.
small and micro business are the natural allies of the anarchist movement.
To give you a chance
And
to
that was
show them
proven
something.
during the Spanish Revolution, where the backbone wasn't the industrial workers, although some of them were obviously industrial workers, but it was all these thousands and tens of thousands of micro businesses.
I'm not sure that analogy is so robust in the 21st century, though, as you
Why it
just
is?
said.
Why do people go into small business?
See,
Well, not because they want
the international says the peasants, artisans and others.
Which is what you suggest.
The working classes are clustered there and the others, the artisans were small business,
That's right.
were tradies.
I'm going into small
Tradies
business
there,
because I want to
yeah,
foster
yeah.
All right, we'll call it to an end. Let's socialise. Let's get in. Buy some beers. It's Christmas. Enjoy yourselves.
extraordinary.
It's business. Enjoy yourselves. Water. You're getting a bit old. That's a bit radical, isn't it?
I usually bring water with me, but I do.
Yeah.
Do you use, I'm just curious, I'm a nerd, do you use